everybody, welcome to another Edis webinar. On this particular section, we're going to cover the January 2019 product updates. So initially last week we sent out an email with all the different product updates that we sent over. But all of those product updates get posted on our blog and media.com/@getedis. So we're also going to be sending a recording of this particular webinar by email as well to all of the Edis users. So January product updates, this is what we're going to be covering today. We're going to cover the most important option is the universal scales. We're also going to cover creating universal scales, linking scales to custom reports, visualizing scale distribution widgets in custom reports. We're also going to be covering a particular new RTI feature, which is embedding custom reports inside RTI interventions. We're going to cover adding formulas to forms, and we're also going to cover rich text in forms and data stories. So obviously the product update has many more things that we worked on, but these are the most important features that we want to cover in today's webinar. For more information, go to medium.com/@getedis, and you will be able to see all the particular items in the product updates. All right, so the first portion of the webinar is going to be universal scales. So quick background on universal scales. A lot of our customers wanted to have a way to be able to segment data into multiple color coding sections. So for example, a particular score would say, hey, from this range to this range, I want to say that this is below expectations, and I want to code that in red. And so there's a lot of different requirements that we had. So we ended up designing this universal scales tool so that you could pretty much take any particular data point and feed it through a universal scale, and that will give you all the different segments, and it will give you context on what it means to fall into a particular segment. So we're going to see how it works. So I'm going to log in here into Edis, and I'm going to use my manager account, and then so in order for you to delete, manage, and create scales, the option is on your far right corner. There's under the system administration. There should be a new tab in there that is called Scales. So you click on the Scales tab, and it takes you to the bank of the multiple scales that you have in the district. You can create unlimited scales. So this is an entire solution, meaning that you can create, delete, edit. So it's not like the system comes, with multiple scales out of the box. You can create unlimited scales. So for example, if I click on this particular scales, for example, for absenteeism, you're gonna see that I have a scale here that divides the attendance rate, right, into normal, which is 90 to 100, significant, high, and extreme, right? So if I go and I try to edit this particular scale, it takes me to the scale editor, and I can now see, on the left, all the fields that make up for the scale that you see on the far right. So what I wanted to do with this is I wanted to show you that, for example, you can create a new scale, and it starts, blank, and there's a form that you need to fill out. But in order to save us a lot of time, what I wanted to do is I wanted to finish a scale that I was already working on. So I'm going to go under this particular scale, and I'm going to find this ABCD rubric scale, and I'm going to edit it. So if you see here, the scales have a name, and that name, it's reflected on the right. So if I want to type in more things here, if you see here, it gives me live feedback of what I'm doing here, right? So scales also have a description, so that you can tell your users, what's the deal with this particular scale. Sometimes you have more supplemental documents that complement that particular scale. So if it's a state assessment type of a scale, or something where the hyperlink to the product for that particular scale, this is a great place to put it in, because it will give you a little more info link on your right, and then your users will be able to click there if they want to drill down for more information, more than what you did in the description section. So there's also a scale type. So you can link numbers to segments, but you can also link text to segments. So if you use a numeric range scale, we're going to tell you, hey, from this number to this number, tell us what the segment is. But if you do fixed values, you'll be able to say, well, on this particular scale, an A means proficient, or a B means below expectations. So those are things that you can do. You can handpick the different scale type that you're working on. So on this particular one, I was working on numeric ranges because I'm converting from a score into a level. So if you see here the next portion of the scale, I need to tell the scale what I'm converting from and to. So that helps the system inform how you're doing on a particular segment of the scale. And we're going to show you what I mean by that when we get ready to show you custom reports visualizing scales information. So obviously, depending on the output that you use, so this scales converts from a score into a level. We're going to give you multiple levels that you can add depending on the score ranges that you work on. So for example, if you see here, my level 1 says below expectations, and you see it here on the right. And each segment also has a description, which is super important because you need to tell your users, what does it mean to be below expectations, right? We also need an abbreviation because sometimes we display data in a cell, in a table, and want to make sure it's short enough so that it looks elegant when people are reading the information on the scale. Each segment also has a connotation. So, hey, sometimes, being below expectations, it's, definitely not neutral, it's something negative. So we want to make sure that we switch the connotation to negative here. And if you notice here, as I'm switching that connotation to negative, it adds this little sad face here. So it actually gives you, like real-time feedback on what the scale, how it's coming along. So obviously, because I said that I'm going to use numeric ranges, I have a range values that I need to set, right? So in this particular case, below expectations is from 0 to 60, right? And then the 0 is included. But if somebody gets a 60, I don't want them to be below expectations. I probably want them to be basic. So that's why you see that the 60 is included on the next segment. So the next piece is obviously each segment has a color that you can set. So obviously we gave you a color palette, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We gave you 10 different colors that you can try. That color palette is the same color palette as the rest of the software so that we can achieve consistency across all the different interfaces. So the next piece is, obviously you have a segment that's basic and it's color coded in orange and it goes from 60 to 80. And I also want to say that this has a negative connotation. And if you see here, it immediately adds my little sad face in there. And then I have proficient. And then I want to add one more level. And that's going to be it for this particular scale. So I'm going to click on add level, right? And if you see here, it brings level number 4. And it brings me like an open form where I can complete my work. So I'm going to say here that I'm going to have the next level is going to be, outstanding. And I'm going to bring here, hey, what does it mean to be on this particular level, right? So I can add a description in there. And then an abbreviation. I'm going to say this is an A, right? And I'm going to say that this has a positive connotation. And then I'm also going to say that this, ranges from a 90 to 100, and it includes both the 90 and the 100. So if you see here, as I click and I switch between included and not included, on my right, the circle gets colored or just the outline. So outline means it means the actual number is not included. If it's filled, it means the number is included. So I'm going to do a green color, and then my scale should be pretty much good to go. So once I have a scale like this designed, I can always find it under System Administration. I click on System Administration, Scales, and then I can always find that particular scale that I worked on. But I can also use it in different objects throughout the entire system. So that's what we're going to cover next. We already went through like the creating process of building universal scales. Now we're going to see how can we link it to actual data. And visualize it, right? So I'm going to use custom reports for that. So I'm going to go in, and I'm going to go into a custom report that I was working on, this universal screener progress report. And if you see here, right, what it has is it just has, different administrations of a universal exam, right? So fall 17, winter 18, spring 18, right? And then I have fall 18, and then I have attendance rates right next to it. So this would be like a really nice correlation between, let's say, a universal exam, right, and some attendance rates, right? So now, as I go through this, I see that my colors are not really meaningful, but I can always link them to scales. So this is what I'm going to do now. So how to do that? You go on your right corner, and then you click on Edit, and then in the same place where you would be able to override the column names and the sizes of your columns, right? So it's that Columns tab. There's a new option on your right that has a scale. And then it brings a drop down with all the different scales that are available on that scales bank in the system. So it's very easy, right? So I can say, for example, that this first 4 data points, I want to link them to that ABCD rubric scale. So if you see here, I just assign a scale to each one of those columns. And I can also say, that for these particular attendance rates, I'm going to link it to that absenteeism scale. And let's see what I get. Right, so I'm linking them in here. And as soon as I save, right, as soon as I save this particular report, you will be able to see that now your custom report has a lot more color, right? And the color, the beauty of this is it depends on what you defined as a scale. So now, not only do we get the colors in the particular custom report, but we also get the abbreviation of that segment. So that's what I was saying in the beginning. The abbreviation is really important because in here, if you were to put in the entire name of the segment that each data point falls into a scale, you wouldn't have enough landscape in your table, right? So that's why we give you a little abbreviation. But if I hover my mouse, the system gives me a little tip where it says a score 63, right? Level basic, and it's a Z, and then click for details. So if I go ahead and I click for details, I can see that a C, a score of 63, falls into level basic. So this is where everything that I designed at the beginning, it's coming to life, right? So I said at the beginning that the scale goes from a score into a level. So there you go, right? Score puts you into a level of basic. And then it has the little sad face in there. So everything that I designed, it's visualized now for my user to be able to understand what does it mean to have a score of 63, right? So now, obviously, it gives me a progress bar where I can see all the different segments and their colors in the scale. And then in the bottom, it gives me all the metadata for that particular scale, all the information for the scale, including the hyperlink that I designed that my scale would link to, right? So that is really important because you have full control and full power over the scales that you design in the software. And we're pretty excited to see the things that our users are going to do with these, right? So obviously providing recommendations when a student falls into a particular segment, that would be a really nice idea to work with. So if you see here, right, clicking on a pop-up actually brings the information over, and the system tells me where I fall into the particular scale. So that is how you visualize a scale in a custom report, right? You just go to Edit, go to Columns, and then you link in on the far right. Now, moving on with the agenda, right? We covered creating universal scales, linking them to custom reports. Now we're going to see how we can visualize widgets with those scales in the custom reports. And it couldn't be easier because I just did it, right? So linking a scale to a column in the bottom of the report, it gives me different widgets for the aggregations of those scales, right? So if I want to see, for example, this fall 17 column, you can see it right here, right? Fall 17, and I click on it and it opens a drawer and it renders a pie chart that tells me how many students are on each particular segment of the scale and what percentage that is versus whatever data I'm filtering by. So if you remember, right, every custom report has a filter where I can actually narrow down my student search. But in this particular case, right, it tells me, I have 152 students who are proficient, is only 2%, right? Obviously, we're dealing with a lot of fake data here, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense that only 2% of your students are proficient. But in the left, you see the actual pie chart rendered, but on your right, you see the actual, again, the metadata about the scale and everything with the hyperlinks that you can click on. So you can open and close the different scales, right? So if I want to see this, attendance rate for this month, I can open in here and I can see, how many students fall into each particular section of the scale. So this is all here. I can show and hide also the student table, which is a new feature for the update as well. So if you see here now the custom report, because it has the scales, it gives me a lot of more meaningful information than what it was giving me before. So that's how you visualize a widget in a custom report. And that pretty much covers the update on scales. Obviously, where this is going forward, we're going to start adding scales to a lot of different objects inside the software. So we're going to add scales to forms. We're going to be adding scales to custom assessments, to the testing platform. So there's a lot of different things that are going to get the scales treatment now. So moving on with our agenda, we're going to cover now embedding custom reports inside RTI interventions. So this is a really well-received type of feature, because a lot of interventionists that work with Edis, they ask us all the time, hey, I know I can get access to a full student profile, because that's the advantage of using Edis, that in the same place that I have an intervention, I can also see full-blown data on students, anything from assignments to grades to behavior incidents to attendance to pretty much anything, right? But I just don't want to be clicking on the actual student every time I want to see more. So what we came up with this software with this feature that is called embedding data visualizations inside RTI intervention. So I'm going to show you with an example. So I'm going to go here into a particular intervention that I always work with, and I can see now that I have my typical intervention, but there's a new tab in here that is called data. So normally I would have my summary of how my intervention is doing, where I can actually open the drawer and I can see the actual charts and see the progress, and if I want to see the raw data for my progress monitoring, I can see it in here, right? But then we also built this thing where, hey, if we already have a tool where we can create any custom reports we like, wouldn't it be great if we could embed that inside an intervention so that the interventionist doesn't have to leave the intervention to see the information? So that's what we did. So if you see here, I have this data tab here, and I can actually click on any report inside the data tab, and I can explore different columns inside the report, right? So how do I do that, right? How do I make a visualization that isn't a custom report available inside an intervention? Well, it's very easy, because you just go under settings, and there's a new drawer here in settings that is called data visualizations. You just click on data visualizations, and if you see here, it has these two data visualizations, which are exactly the two data visualizations that you see in here. So how do you add it? Very similar to how you add anything in the software, right? You click on add data visualizations. You find a data visualization you want, right? So for example, this intervention support report, and you select it. If you see here, it adds it to the bottom. And now if I save my intervention, I can go in here under data, and I see that new drawer in there. So if I click on the actual drawer, it opens up, and I can see now more information, right? Absences, overtime, historical, behavior incidents, race codes, home languages. So there's a lot of information that I could get on the student profile, but I would have to go student by student, right? And obviously, I can still, click on the student and then see the student profile and drill down for more if I want to. But there's a lot of information that now the intervention coordinators can make available to the interventionists through that data visualizations tab. So that's the way it works. And obviously, the obvious question is, hey, I just don't want to be doing this every time I build an intervention, right? So the good news is you can do it at the template level. So now for every template, you can actually go in and under the settings, add the visualization into the template. And now every time you build an intervention from a template, so if I see here, I have this template here, and if I click on create intervention, I will get all the data from the template, right? You will also get the data visualizations from the template too. So as you start adding students into your intervention group, that report is going to get enhanced, row by row with the new students that you add in there. So it's all intended so you can be, extremely productive. And the less clicks you have to go through, the more time we're going to save you. So that's, embedding a custom report inside an intervention. So the next big update that we did is formulas. So a lot of our customers wanted to have a lot of control and a lot of very complex type of calculations. And what we were seeing is that they were, assembling a report with Edis. They were exporting it, and they were applying formulas to those reports. So when we looked at the different formulas, right, we noticed that, a very small subset of users that are using Edis are very proficient in Excel. But they obviously don't have the capability to manage, hey, I'm building this report, but if I want to send it to a building, I need to make sure I hide the students or that particular building is not supposed to see. So there's a lot of privacy issues that Edis solves out of the box, but then Edis didn't have the full power that Excel had on applying formulas to your data. So that's what we did now. So I'm going to show you with an example what we mean by applying formulas to forms. So I'm going to go, and the same thing that I did with the scales, I have a form that I've been working on, and we're going to continue our work. So I'm going to use this performance review form that I was building. And if you see here, let me show you how the form looks like now. So if you see here, it asks me for a student, right? I need a school year, a term. These are drop downs, right? And then these data points here on universal screeners for math, they should be coming automatically from the data warehouse as I load the students, right? So let's play with it just for a second. So I'm just going to bring a student here, right? And if you notice here, right, it's giving me, hey, a 36 on the spring administration, then on the fall administration got a 70. Is the student high achievement? No. And the student is considered high achieving if he or she scores 80 or more in the most recent math universal exam. Okay, so obviously a 70, it's not greater or equal than an 80, so that means you are not high achievement, right? So those are things that Edis is calculating for me automatically, right? It's bringing this data points from the data warehouse, from the data points library, and it's also calculating this high achievement thing. So let's go into the background of the form and see how that's working in the background. So I'm going to go in and edit the form. And now I go into the form editor page, and you can see now that on this particular field, for example, this is a data point that it's coming from the data warehouse. Okay, that's really basic. But then in here, I have these formulas that I have applied here. And the only difference between Excel and Edis now is that instead of building formulas for when you have to link to actual cells, like A1, B1, C1, those cell lookups that you always do in Excel, you link to variable names. So you can take any field in Edis and you can assign a formula code to that field. So for example, this spring 2018 field that I just brought in, which is a universal exam score, right? If you see here, I have a new option here that's called formula code. And if I code that between brackets, that means that whenever I refer to math 1, I'm going to be able to bring the value of math 1. Now, the power of these is that I can pull data from any other field in the form, including formula fields. So it does a lot of complex operations in the background, right? But the end result feels like magic to the end user. So for example, I have this thing here, this formula that is an auxiliary formula. Actually, the users of this form are not actually going to see it, but it does really help me build my logic of the form. So I have something that's called isValid, and what that means is, hey, I just want to work with fields that have content, right? So if I can't find a score for math 1 and math 2, then hey, I just don't want to say that my data is valid. So now the other piece is, hey, I just want to make sure I don't work with zeros, right? So obviously, if it's not valid, right, and the values are 0, that's not within the range that I want to work with, right? And then I have this high achievement formula, and like I explained, right, having an 80 or more makes you high achieving. So how do you code that? It's very easy, right? So if you actually have a value in there, and that value it's greater than 80, greater or equal than 80, then yes, you are high achieving, right? Or otherwise you're not. So this is typical Excel syntax, right? But instead of doing A1, A2, B2, B1, you're referring to the actual formula code within the Edis form. So the power of these, it's unbelievable. We're gonna have probably like a separate webinar with another district where we're gonna do a real life example of a very complex form that has like 20 different formula fields working in the background, right? So you can do pretty much anything you were doing in Excel. You can do it now inside an Edis form. So to continue my example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more field in here, and that field is going to tell me whether the student is high growth or not. So let's do that. I'm going to add a field, and if you see here, I have a new option here that is called formula. So I take this formula field in here, and I'm going to call this field high growth. So in my formula code, I'm going to go really short in here because I just want to keep it simple, right? So high growth, And then in the formula, I do the same things that I would do in Excel, right? So I can say, if this, do this, and then otherwise do that. So it's, again, very simple Excel syntax, right? So I'm gonna just copy and paste a formula code that I was working with in here. And there you go, right? So if I have a math growth score, right, and that value of that score, it's greater than equals that 50, right, then yes, you are high growth, right, or otherwise you're not. So you select it here, right, so I now have my formula for high growth, and I'm going to move it up in here, and I'm going to add a little divider in here, and then I also want to make sure that that high growth formula shows when I'm listing multiple students at the same time. So if you see here, it's very simple, right? And then obviously that code, it's assisted by this math growth formula that is actually, saying, hey, if everything is within range, right? Take the value of math 2 divided by math 1, subtract 1, multiply it by 100, rounded, and that gives you the growth, right? So again, it might sound really complicated for a lot of people, but those of you who are doing a lot of work in Excel, you know how much this is going to impact your productivity, because at the end of the day, we spend time designing these forms, but then we're sure that once we have the form ready, people that are completing the form, everything loads automatically for them, right? So I can now bring that same student, right? If it's here, it loads that the student is not high achieving, but it's high growth because it went from a 70 to a 36. So all of these gets rendered automatically. I can add my comments, right? These are my comments, and I just need to complete, let's say, 2018-19 fall, submit it, and now I can see the actual form that is being built up, and I have all of these options in here, right? So obviously, if you see here, I don't see the high achieving column, and that's because I left it hidden, right? So I can actually go in and filter, and I can say, show me those students where high growth is yes, and then it actually drills down to only those that are high growth equals yes. So that's a lot of power that you have now with the form fields, and you can actually go in and edit the form, add your formulas. So the really nice way of designing these things is I start building, and I start testing, and I test with one particular entry, and then I test it again. And once I'm sure that all my formulas are working correctly, I save the form, and then I can just open it up for the general public so that they just enter the information. So again, a lot of work when we design the form, a lot of creativity. We got to play with math here, but pretty much every formula that you can do in Excel, you will be able to do it now with Edis. And then at the end of the day, it's just work that we put in, but then our end user gets all of these information automatically, right? So that's adding formulas to forms. So the last update that I wanted to share with you is that we added the capacity of having rich text in forms and data stories as well. So if you see, for example, I have this form here that I'm working with, and I have this table here that helps me explain, what the universal screener data looks like, right? So how do you do that, right? Inside the form, there's now the capability of doing more than just text, but hypertext when I'm modifying a particular field. So for example, if I want to come in here and I want to say, this particular field here for high growth, right? I'm going to say, a student is considered high growth when he or she experiences a growth of whatever percent, right? So I go in and I can actually modify my text now. And I can say, I want to change the actual form, and I want to use a different form, and I also want to do colors. So I can actually play with the colors, and I can actually say, 50% or more, I can put it in bold, and I can have like entire sections for where I can do numeric lists. I can do bullet points. So there's a lot of different things that I can do by having hypertext in here. I can paste images. I can do hyperlinks to external sources. So obviously when I save it, if you see here, it builds it into the form. And the same capacity, it's also built in data stories. So I can go, for example, into any data story in Edis, right? And I can say, you know what, I'm just going to take this data story here, and I'm going to use, I'm going to edit it. And then I'm going to be able to say, you know what, on this particular section, I wanted to use rich text. So that's another section type that you have on data stories. So it helps you have more control over your design because you have a rich text editor that it's embedded in there. So I know a lot of our districts wanted a feature like that because they wanted to be able to play with colors and use tables to have more like a horizontal type of layout. So now they have that capacity. So again, that's it. There's a full documentation on what was covered on the updates. But again, very simple. We worked on universal scales. I showed you how to create a universal scale, how to link it to a custom report, how to visualize it using the pie charts. I also showed you how to embed custom reports data inside RTI interventions with that data visualizations tab. We also worked on how to add formulas to forms. And then finally, how to use rich text for forms as well as data stories. So for some of these subjects, we're going to have standalone webinars that we're going to be sharing with you. But again, the intention of this particular webinar is just to cover the updates for January. And if you want to have the full-blown documentation on the update, go to our blog, medium.com/getedis, and then you'll be able to see all the information. All right, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you on the next Edis webinar. Thank you.